Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me this evening. Tonight, we are bringing you a special report called The War on Women. There is a lot of talk right now about what's happening in the mainstream press about Trump's authoritarian attacks on the Doge demolition team. But what is flying under the radar is the attack on women's rights, presented by Project 2025 and promised in Project 2025. They plan essentially to do many things, really, to undermine women's rights in this country, and they want to bring that plan into fruition, and many Republican states have already begun implementing this. Lisa Fowler is a local Georgia resident. She will be here to discuss the state's anti-abortion legislation in just a moment. But to start off this special report, to start off the attack on women's rights, we need to start with this timeline. If you just look at this timeline here, I want you all to understand that most of the rights that women have been granted in the United States is actually not that old. It is fairly recent. It was in 1920 that white women were granted the right to vote. In 1965, finally, under federal civil and voting rights protections, black women finally got the right to vote. By 1972, women could get birth control without a man. In 1974, women could buy a home without a man. In 1988, women could own their own businesses without a man. In 1994, women gained legal protections against domestic abuse. And in 1973, women were granted federal legal protections for abortion rights in the historic Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government.
That was the estimable Walter Cronkite reporting on that landmark 7-2 decision regarding federal abortion rights on CBS News back in 1972. And this really was such a monumental decision at the time because the truth is women were dying trying to get life-saving abortion care by either traveling out of the country or essentially getting them in back rooms. It was a visceral nightmare for many women across the country. But Roe being upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court was absolutely major. Justice Harry Blackmun wrote in this majority decision, he wrote here, quote, "This right of privacy, whether it be founded in the 14th Amendment's concept of personal liberty and restrictions upon state action as we feel it is, or in the 9th Amendment's reservation of rights to the people, is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy." End quote. At the time, this was a relatively controversial decision. Justice Blackmun actually got death threats and even needed a security protection after an attempt on his life. But it was clear that abortion rights were still going to be under attack here. And, one of the things that Justice Blackmun was worried about essentially was states exercising too much power over a woman's right to choose and how catastrophic that would be, as women essentially would have to travel to different jurisdictions, different states, just to get the care that they needed. And the problem with that is that traveling is expensive. Not everyone can afford to, spend $5,000 to cover travel costs, which includes plane tickets, which includes a hotel stay, and also getting the life-saving abortion care. Not everyone can afford to do that. Not everyone can afford to take time off to go do something like that. And, when it comes to abortion care in this country, conservatives at the time of this Supreme Court ruling, they were reeling from the fact. They were seething with infuriation that this had happened. And so they really continued to beat the drum on this, on how we can repeal federal abortion rights. And maybe if we can't start or win at the federal level temporarily or just right now, let's start doing this in the states. And so they began. In Missouri, there was a law restricting the use of public facilities and employees for abortions. In Louisiana, there was a law banning nearly all abortions with exceptions of rape, incest, and if the life of a mother was needed to be saved. That law was struck down in court. In South Dakota, there was a 1989 law banning all abortions except when the woman's life was at stake. That law was also struck down in court. In Utah, they were so extreme, essentially, with their anti-abortion views that they put in an ad in a newspaper, quote, "In Utah, they know how to punish a woman who has an abortion. Shoot her." In that state, there was a law requiring parental consent, limiting second trimester abortions. and a near total abortion ban, except in cases of rape, incest, or threats to the mother's life. That was also struck down in court. In the U.S. territory of Guam, they passed a law in 1990 banning all abortions with no exceptions whatsoever. Regardless of rape, incest, or if you were dying on the table and needed life-saving medical care, if you live in Guam at the time, you could not get an abortion at all, regardless of the circumstance, regardless if your stepfather molested you, regardless if you were the victim of rape. You could not get an abortion at all in Guam at the time. And that was so extreme, that was so vituperatively extreme and egregious that it was actually ruled unconstitutional. It was struck down. But it wasn't until the state of Pennsylvania tried their anti-abortion legislative actions that conservatives got a minor win, when this actually went before the Supreme Court in Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
Tom, the bottom line is this. States may not outlaw abortions, but they may enact restrictions which could make abortions more difficult to obtain and more expensive.
Let's go!
Pandemonium broke out in the press room when the decision finally came. Outside the court, both sides in the abortion war immediately expressed their displeasure.
We, of course, are very disappointed today in the court's refusal to reverse Roe when they had this opportunity.
Today, the Supreme Court took another giant step backward, setting back the cause of women's rights and setting back the lives and health of women.
The court upheld provisions of the Pennsylvania law requiring a 24-hour waiting period for women seeking abortions, that women be informed of fetal development and abortion alternatives, and parental consent for minors. But the court struck down a requirement that a woman notify her husband before having an abortion on grounds that was an undue burden. The scene inside the usually staid court was the most emotional in 20 years. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who wrote the decision, said that while abortion may be repugnant to some, our obligation is to defend the liberty of all. Justice Anthony Kennedy said the state may not enter the private realm of family life. Justice David Souter said the court should not surrender to political pressure from anti-abortion forces. Those three justices joined with the court's two liberals in preserving legal abortion.
That was reporting from NBC News. In 1992, the Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision weakened Roe versus Wade. And finally, for conservatives, this was a win because it gave a lot of power to the states to make their own abortion laws, no matter how extreme or draconian they were. And when Donald Trump was elected president in 2016, when he took office in 2017, over the course of his four-year term, he appointed 3 justices on the Supreme Court with the intention of overturning Roe versus Wade. So it was already weakened back in 1992. So conservatives were still going to try to beat the drum at this to get this repealed effectively at the federal level. They were doing good in the states, but let's throw out this decision completely. And Amy Coney Barrett, she completed that trifecta, that Trump trifecta of the 3 judges on the court, which were all but guaranteed, essentially, to overturn federal abortion rights in the United States. And in 2022, they did exactly that. It was front page news everywhere. Conservatives saw this as a huge win, a huge victory for them after decades of trying to overturn federal abortion rights. Trump himself later bragged about this, calling it a beautiful thing that he had succeeded in overturning Roe v. Wade because people wanted this.
The whole thing was they wanted the Roe v. Wade was federal, and they wanted it all back in the states where the people could vote and make their decisions. It's now up to the will of the people in each state. Some states will be more conservative, other states will be more liberal. It's happening now. You see the votes are all taking place.
What has happened since Roe v. Wade has been overturned has been repulsive. It has been devastating, and for so many women across the country, it has led to death. Republican states all across the country have enacted some type of abortion bans, and what has resulted is women dying without proper care, doctors fearing to perform abortion care with threats of criminal prosecution, young girls who are the survivors of rape or incest having to cross state lines just to get abortion. Black women being disproportionately affected by these bans, as black women are already more likely to die giving childbirth in the United States. These are just some stories of some women who've been affected by Trump's abortion bans. This woman here is Carmen Brodser. In December of 2022, 5 months after Roe v. Wade was overturned, she bled out for 19 days before receiving care because of Idaho's strict abortion laws. This was her in the hospital in pain.
I've been actively miscarrying since the 8th. I have gone to a doctor, and this is my second visit to the ER. If you're wondering why women's rights matter, I'm just gonna bleed out on this table before somebody comes and actually helps me. This is my life. Nobody actually is coming down. They're always gonna send me home.
Carmen survived, but now she, for the rest of her life, will effectively live with an incurable heart condition. It is not curable. This here is Amber Nicole Thurman. Doctors watched her die slowly for 20 hours before they decided to finally operate. Her death was completely preventable, according to Georgia experts. She has, essentially she had taken abortion pills and encountered a rare complication. She hadn't expelled all of the fetal tissue from her body, so Amber showed up to Piedmont Henry Hospital for a routine procedure to clear it from her uterus called a D&C. According to reporting from ProPublica, that would not happen because, quote, just that summer, her state had made performing the procedure a felony with few exceptions. Any doctor who violated the new Georgia law could be prosecuted and face up to a decade in prison. Thurman waited in pain in a hospital bed, worried about what would happen to her 6-year-old son as doctors monitored her infection spreading. Her blood pressure sinking and her organs beginning to fail. It took 20 hours for doctors to finally operate. By then, it was too late. Giselle Barnica laid in agony for 40 hours because doctors said that they had to wait for the heartbeat to die. And then, predictably, she died 3 days later because her uterus was exposed to an infection. Her husband now has to raise their 4-year-old daughter alone. Amari Marsh in South Carolina had a miscarriage, and because of the state's strict abortion laws, she was arrested for murder, and she spent 3 weeks in jail and then an additional 13 months on house arrest. These women are just some of many who are going through this. This is all because conservatives and Donald Trump wanted a win. And abortion really didn't even become political until Nixon and Republicans back in the 70s started running with it as an issue to win over white voters who were losing, who they were losing effectively because being a staunch segregationist was no longer acceptable. It was no longer an acceptable political message as diversity was building in the country, as diversity was becoming something that the country could actually feel. And so they ran with abortion. They ran with anti-abortion ads and an anti-abortion sentiment, making it a political issue. That's why we are here. This is a decades-long conservative movement to restrict women's rights in this country on a massive scale. They would much rather prefer for women in this country to have no rights, to have their role in society be reduced to nothing. Abortion is healthcare. If you have an ectopic pregnancy, for example, that is a non-viable pregnancy for which the only treatment is abortion. States are now making that difficult to access. And since Trump has won re-election in 2025, what we are facing right now is we are staring down the barrel of what's next. In 2022, this was data published showing where abortion restrictions are in the mortality rates by the state. It is no coincidence looking at this map here. In 2025, there is this map where abortions are legal. Now, this is another map for 2025 where abortion bans are in effect, including full bans regardless of rape, incest, or the threat to a mother's life. We're going to have more reporting this Friday on these abortion bans in other states, but tonight we're really going to focus on what's happening in Georgia because that's the subject of the interview that I have coming up here in just a moment. Right now, Georgia's abortion ban is tied to the notion that personhood begins at conception, banning abortions at 6 weeks. In March, a Republican lawmaker introduced a bill that would make abortion after fertilization a homicide, and a pregnant woman could be charged with a crime unless she could prove that she was forced into having an abortion. There has been nothing done on that as of yet, but there is also another bill advancing known as HB 441, which would significantly restrict abortion access in the state of Georgia and charge mothers with murder, punishable up to 20 years in jail. Think about what they're trying to do here. They're trying to restrict abortion access in the states because Trump said we need to give it back to the states. That's what they're trying to do here. Justice Harry Blackmun warned about the states having this insane control, this much control over abortion rights in the United States. He warned about that when he wrote in the majority decision in 1972. By 1992, so 20 years later, Roe v. Wade had been weakened. The states had more power. And now we are here in 2025, and the states have even more power now that Roe v. Wade has officially been overturned. And Georgia is really a prime example of what they're trying to do at the state level in terms of Republicans getting rid of abortion rights completely, regardless of rape, incest, or the threat to a mother's life. I spoke with local Georgia resident Lisa Fowler, who is a mother herself. I spoke with her about this legislation, a potential nationwide abortion ban, and more. This was our interview. Georgia's abortion ban is tied to the idea that personhood begins when a fetal heartbeat is detected, often around 6 weeks. What are your thoughts on how the state defines personhood and the vast effects, including fatal, that this will have on women in the state?
I think primarily at this juncture, personhood is defined for their agenda. At the time, Roe versus Wade had just been overturned. And so instead of instituting a statewide abortion ban, they opted for 6 weeks. And I think it's personally because of the outrage that everybody had in Georgia when Roe versus Wade was overturned. To go into how it's going to affect people, I just feel like doctors will start to consider the government prior to actually what the mother needs first. And that's the most important thing. So it just sets a dangerous precedent.
And we have seen cases like that where there is a rising in miscarriages or stillbirths, or what happened, under the 2024 election when that was covered, a young Black woman in Georgia. What are the real life consequences that you're seeing and you're hearing about more? And is there greater fear in the community? Because I know criminal prosecution is being threatened.
Yes, right now it is the 6-week abortion ban, but they are proposing HB 441, which is a bill that would define personhood at the time of conception. And that is really dangerous because in that bill, it would charge mothers with homicide, which is punishable by up to 20 years in jail. So there's just many things that I feel like women already have on their plate that they have to figure out when they become pregnant. So to understand that you could be charged with something that is totally out of your control is outrageous. Also in the bill, there's verbiage where if you are coerced or pressure to have an abortion, that would help prove your case, but that burden of proof is still on the mom. So it's still, you're being threatened with charges for murder, and you have to prove your innocence or prove that somebody coerced you. It's very dangerous. And to take into account IVF, if Emory Donahue, he is the person out of District 14 who proposed this bill. Under his bill, doctors would be charged with murder. They would be considered serial killers because I don't know if you know, but in order to have an embryo, you must fertilize an egg. And during the IVF process, you could fertilize up to 20 eggs, and 2 of those could be viable. So you're trying to charge doctors with 18 murders. It just doesn't make sense. And it's very, very dangerous. And it's only threatening women.
Yeah, exactly. And that definitely is the goal here because, as you said here with IVF and abortion and other fertility treatments, um, I feel that there is going to be a growing of fear in the community, with people trying to seek actual reproductive care. What's it like on the ground in Georgia with like, abortion clinics or people who are seeking fertility treatment?
Right now, even some of the pro-life companies, they are against this bill because they know how dangerous it is. People who are standing out of abortion clinics with signs, they are somehow on the same side of pro-choice. If this bill was anything that was about women or protecting the babies, I think that they would be 100% behind that. But that is a telltale sign that this is a very dangerous bill.
Mm. How do these laws affect marginalized communities in Georgia, specifically Black women, immigrants, and low-income families?
This is definitely where I feel like it's the most dangerous for people who are coming from a lower socioeconomic status, who are already finding it difficult to find basic health care. Black women are already at a 2.5 times more likely to die during maternal mortality than any other race, including their white counterparts. It's just absolutely outrageous. And it feels like a direct attack on the lower class, the lower, economic status people, because they do not have access to that same level of care. You cannot just find $1,000 to get on a flight, to go to a different state, to go to their abortion clinics. Like, this is a direct effect on those people. So you could already tell that the agenda of the current administration is to just have more babies, and they don't mind in whatever context that is, how they are raised, how they eat. They just care about the number.
Exactly.
And
Well,
that's very dangerous.
exactly. While also taking away programs that are meant to benefit children. Like $5,000 is going to help for
I
mother.
know. Giving $5,000 to women while also cutting Head Start programs.
Exactly.
If anybody thinks that the current administration is going to follow through on staying out of the state's business when they have already said that they would leave it up to the states to determine their abortion bans. But based on Project 2025, everything that our current administration has said during his campaign was a lie. So to think that he would hold that to a higher standard, even though you want more babies to be born and you won't implement a national abortion ban, I think it's severely naive to think that the people would assume that to be true.
Exactly. And in regard to what you just said there about Project 2025, it does mention a nationwide abortion ban. What is your future on, abortion rights just writ large in America? Like the view of your future of it, because it's getting quite scary. And I feel like this is something that's not getting enough attention. And I feel like when it's time, they're gonna sneak it up and it's gonna like become this huge story.
Oh, I 100% agree. And this directly has an effect on my life because in 2021 I was a surrogate, and it's something that I enjoyed immensely. To bring that joy to a family who wasn't able to do that themselves just was probably one of the top 3 experiences in my life. And it's something that I honestly thought about considering doing again until this happened, because
Mm,
now I have to be concerned with what happens if I accidentally miscarry? Are you going to leave the baby inside of me? I have a child. Like, these things have to be considered when talking about national abortion bans. Doesn't just affect one person or somebody who just decides that they don't want to have a baby today. This affects everyone.
What role do you think local activism and also just nationwide activism, grassroots level, is playing in sort of having a pushback against these laws? And are there any groups that give you hope right now?
I just think getting the attention out, just anybody who is brave enough to speak about it. One particular group, the people, oh goodness, what is their name? The People's Union, don't quote me on that. They have done a really good job of just really outlining what the current administration's plans are and what they are doing. They're really just getting out there. And I feel like in your community, that's where it starts. Like, you have to just go out, speak against your representatives, let them know that these are issues for you. These are issues in your community. Like, you care about the children, you care about feeding the children, not just having them on this earth. So I really just think it starts with us and like amplifying our voices and just really getting out of there and making waves, because at the end of the day, they're not going to be here forever, 4 years. But like, if we start to speak out now, if we make it harder for them to pass these laws to push their agendas, then that's a win in my book.
Once again, that was my interview with local resident Lisa Fowler speaking about the attack on abortion rights in the state of Georgia. I will just note here that since I've spoken to Ms. Fowler about what's happening in the state of Georgia, there was horrific breaking news last Friday out of the state regarding the cruelty of these abortion laws. This is reporting from NBC News here.
It started with headaches. April Newkirk says her 30-year-old daughter, Adriana Smith, was pregnant with her second child when something started to go terribly wrong.
They did a CT scan and she had blood clots all in her head.
Speaking to NBC affiliate WXIA, Newkirk says soon after that, Adriana was declared brain dead by Emory doctors. That was back in February, but she's still in the hospital, Newkirk says, on life support. The doctors haven't withdrawn, because that would mean the unborn fetus Adriana still carries would also die, a potential violation of Georgia's strict abortion law.
It's torture for me. I come here and I see my daughter breathing by the ventilator. She's not there.
The law bans most abortions after roughly 6 weeks of pregnancy, with narrow exceptions. Emory says it doesn't comment on patient cases, but the hospital uses, quote, individualized treatment recommendations in compliance with Georgia's abortion laws. It's all raising fresh questions about the reach of the law. Republican State Senator Marty Harbin says he still supports it.
We have already determined that she does not have life, but yet the baby does have life.
The current plan, Newkirk says, is to keep Adriana alive until doctors can deliver the baby safely via C-section. For now, her mother waits.
I'm not saying that we would have chose to terminate her pregnancy. What I'm saying is we should have had a choice.
Once again, reporting from NBC News there, incredibly disturbing, incredibly devastating breaking news. I will say, just on a personal level, and putting this report together as an investigative journalist, as someone who covers, all types of things as a part of independent media, a lot of reports that I put together are hurtful in terms of, making my heart break. But this one in particular was deeply visceral to create and also to edit, quite frankly, because of the description of some of these stories. I mean, it is truly devastating as a result what is happening in the United States as a result of Trump's abortion bans. And we should be clear about the fact of how dangerous this is, how dangerous it is across the country. Women are dying in this country in huge numbers because of abortion bans in multiple states. Look at that map again. This is where abortion is legal. These are where abortion bans are in effect, including some states with complete abortion bans, regardless of rape, regardless of incest, and regardless of a threat to a mother's life. So there are states in this country where women are dying on the table. There are states in this country where young girls are being forced to bear the child of their rapist. There are states in this country where where women are dying, where husbands and spouses are watching their wives, their girlfriends die on the table because doctors are scared of being prosecuted. Doctors are scared here of criminal prosecution. They are scared of going to jail. They are scared of having to defend themselves in court later. It is diametrically reprehensible, but it is happening all across the country because of something that this president did, and it is something that this president brags about, and what Republicans are doing across the map here to make sure that this stays permanent. But it's not just abortion rights. It's not just reproductive health care that's under attack. On a broader scale, the financial rights of women is also under attack. In April, Trump signed an executive order called Restoring Equality of Opportunity and Meritocracy, which ordered the rollback of disparate impact rules under laws like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Now, what this does essentially is allow lenders to discriminate on the basis of sex, which undermines women's credit rights. Newsweek reported the executive order, quote, raises concerns over the protection of women's financial independence. So think about what they're trying to do here. They're not just wanting to go after women's reproductive healthcare rights, because abortion is healthcare. They're not just wanting to go after women's reproductive rights, but they're also wanting to control essentially every aspect of women in this country. Let's go after women's financial independence. With the SAVE Act, as I've been reporting on for months here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show, they're trying to do this to go after married women in this country, to make sure that they can take away your right to vote just because when you got married, hey, you took your spouse's last name. So you're no longer eligible to vote if it doesn't match the identification on your passport. You have to get new identification to prove that you're still a citizen of this country just because you got married. It is the collective assault on women's rights in this country that needs to be talked about more. It needs to be reported on. And that's why we're bringing you this special report tonight, The War on Women, because it's something that has flew under the radar. But it's also important to note here that they really are trying to do things like national abortion bans and to attack women's rights writ large. But what the Trump administration has succeeded on, for the most part, in terms of most people being overwhelmed legitimately, is flooding the news cycle with multiple stories so that you're never really focused on one specific thing, so that you're never really focused on one exact thing that they are doing. And with women's rights here, there will come a time where they have done something so brazen, so draconian against women in this country that it will sneak up. And a lot of people in the mainstream press will act surprised. But if you've been paying attention, it will not be of surprise because we saw this coming from miles away. So it is important to stay clear-eyed about this, to continue to follow closely what's happening with the attack on women's rights in this country. And that's exactly why this Friday we're going to be doing part 2, essentially discussing the attacks on abortion rights in this country. It's not just what's happening in Georgia. It's also multiple other states where there's a major assault on abortion rights and reproductive health care in this country. So we're going to have reporting on that this Friday on the Jeremiah Patterson Show. So be sure to subscribe so you do not miss that. That's going to do it for this special report. I really do hope you enjoyed this. Please be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Also, comment your suggestions, your questions, and your thoughts on this video. If you are a fan of the Jeremiah Patterson Show, please be sure to recommend it to your family and friends. You can also support us by donating financially, as this is independent journalism, and we rely on your donations to continue this crucial work. Another way you can support the Jeremiah Patterson Show is by becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack at tjpsnews for just $7.99 or $75 a year. I will see you again tomorrow for breaking news updates and brief videos. And then later on in the night, I'll see you for the TJPS Evening News Show. Be sure to follow me on Blue Sky and Substack at TJPS News. If you have any questions, news topic requests, or want to do a collaboration, you can email me tjpsnews@gmail.com.